Hello, hello, my spooky friends. I'm Marcy, and today I'm going to tell you my favorite horror mystery thriller reads that I've read in the past few years. So this list is in no particular order. I have kind of split it up into two sections. Horror that is more of like atmospheric, spooky vibes, and then horror that is more focused on like body horror and gore, stuff like that. So I do have my favorites in each of the two sections, and I'll start off with those for each of them, but the rest are in no particular order, and I'm just gonna run through them fairly quickly, and maybe you find a fun new recommendation for this spooky season. All right, I'm going to start with my favorite of the two categories. This is definitely more spooky, just, like foggy, dark, gloomy vibes, that kind of stuff. And the first one I'm going to start with, which is my favorite that I've read, at least, recently, it's still like stuck with me. That is The Good House by Tananarive Due. I read this within the last year, and it's like the perfect haunted house book for me. Like, this story really knocked it out of the park. There's this woman who is working to rebuild her law practice after her son dies by suicide, and she ends up going back to her family house where the suicide happened to sort of like sort stuff out. But during her time there, stuff starts to get super duper spooky, and some of the townsfolk as well get wrapped up in this and start doing things seemingly against their will, and she has to try to figure out what's going on and hopefully save people from her spooky house. Next up is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. In this one, a young woman is called out to a somewhat rundown mansion by her newlywed cousin to save her from a certain situation that she's gotten herself in. And when the young woman gets there, there are some serious spooky vibes going on in this house. And there's this like ongoing question, is this all just a bad dream, a bad trip? Is this any of this real? And deciphering that and maybe trying to save her cousin. So I had a lot of fun with this one, especially because it was set in Mexico. And yeah, I really enjoyed this one. This next one also features a spooky house in addition to a spooky village, and that is Your House is on Fire, Your Children All Gone by Stefan Kisbu. And this is everything I wanted We Have Already Lived in the Castle to be. That one was a disappointment, but when I found out this one was similar and many people liked it even better, I was super excited and was not disappointed. So this story follows some of the people living in the village of Hemmersmoor, a place seemingly untouched by time and shrouded in superstition. And there is this grand manor set distinctly apart from the village because they don't want nothing to do with these lower class people. And there is a group of 4 children that we see coming of age and eventually growing up in this village, and they are soon learning about the many dark secrets that this village holds. And it has some like Children of the Corn vibes and some Brothers Grimm vibes because it's like, rural Germany, and I had a lot of fun with it. Creepy children, for sure. Oh man, this is definitely one of my favorite new additions to my spooky season reads. This is Through the Woods by Emily Carroll, and when I first read this, I was just absolutely stunned by the artwork in this book. Like, it hits everything I want to hit in regards to like creepy and beautiful and eerie and just mysterious. There's just so much going on here, and just the artwork is fantastic, and the stories themselves are also really, really good. So this is also a quick read because it is a graphic novel, so definitely check this one out. You will have time for it. Now I have a classic gothic horror, The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. So 4 people show up to the notoriously unfriendly Hill House to hope to find some sort of evidence of its haunting. And slowly they discover that the house has powers, and eventually it's going to end up choosing one of the 4 to make its own. And it is a bit of a slow burn. It's not like a jump in your face kind of spooky, scary book, but woo, the atmosphere in this house is tense, and I don't believe in haunted houses for real, but I would be a little nervous stepping into this one. Another kind of haunted house, this is Slade House by David Mitchell. If the conditions are right, you may find the entrance to the Slade House, where a stranger will greet you by name and invite you inside. At first, you won't want to leave, but later, you'll find out that you can't. I liked this one a lot, and you get to see time pass, so it's like 9 years between each of these occurrences. So the house really only shows up to normal people every 9 years, so they can draw a new victim into its trap, and it's a lot of fun figuring out what's going on in this house. Next, not a house, but an apartment. This is The Graveyard Apartment by Mariko Koike. In this one, a young family moves into a fancy new apartment building that happens to be surrounded by a cemetery on like 3 of the 4 sides, you know, no big deal, but whatever. But soon they learn that, maybe this apartment really was too good to be true. And the spooky ghost elements really pop off. Like it's like a somewhat slow build, but man, by the end, it it really made me afraid of basements all over again. Like I don't have a basement right now, but thankfully I don't, because I would not go down there after reading this book. If you have already delved into the world of literary horror, you may have already heard of this one, and it's somewhat controversial, but it is one of my favorites. It did such a good job at scaring me to my core that I can't forget about it. And I'm probably going to reread it this season, or at least try to, but it is a chunky boy. This is House of Leaves by Marcy Danielewski. It's not a normal book. Like, there are just random pages. It's like it's meant to be like a random collection of pages that you've just like found on a bench somewhere, just left abandoned by someone, and you start reading it, and then you realize, oh, this is why whoever previously owned it left it. They needed to get rid of it, get it out of their lives. And then you go through that journey reading it, and I think that's a lot of fun. The basic premise of this is you have this normal family that's living in this seemingly normal home, and they discover behind this like normal looking closet door a seemingly ever-growing abyss, and they don't know why it's there. It's like it's so massive. It starts off as like, I think, a corridor, and it just keeps going and going and going, and the family are not equipped to deal with this house. So they call upon some expert adventurers, explorers, the type of people who would like go conquer Mount Everest or whatever. And they go on an expedition into this abyss, and then you read it and see their experience, and there's some madness involved. So I'm gonna leave it at that. If you're curious about it, I highly, highly, highly recommend checking it out in physical form. I don't think the ebook experience of this is gonna be the same. So yeah. Next, I have something that's more of a like fantasy, magical realism, but still like horror book, and that is The Changeling by Victor Lavelle. This one kind of caught me off guard. I wasn't really fully prepared for it when I first read it, but it hit good. So a husband and wife are so excited for the birth of their first child, but then it all goes wrong. The wife disappears after committing an unforgivable act of violence, and now the husband is devoting his life to tracking her down and making her pay for what she did. It's intense. Maybe look up some trigger warnings if you're sensitive about children and harm coming to children. The next book I have for you is Certain Dark Things by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. I saw this cover and I knew I had to have it because it is just absolutely perfect for me. It's right up my alley. So it's like a sexy, cool vampire lady and her awesome biogenetically engineered dog with bioluminescent tattoos, and there's just like neon stuff going on, and it takes place in Mexico City. I adored this book. Imagine different classes or families of vampires clashing with police on the streets of Mexico City in like some alternate world. And a hapless teen boy gets roped into this as well. And it's bloody. there's a lot going on. So imagine, I read it as like a different way of telling the story of cartels like fighting on the streets of Mexico involving civilians, but instead of like, you know, drug traffickers, you have vampires. So, you know, there's stuff to read in there. But even beyond that, if you only just look at the surface story, I think it's a lot of fun too. Just some badass vampires murdering each other. And it was everything I needed from it, and it was perfect. It was great. So much fun. The last book I have in the spooky vibes category is Moon of the Crusted Snow by Waubgeshig Rice. This is a post-apocalyptic thriller that takes place in a small northern Anishinaabe community. And suddenly one day everything goes dark. No power grid, no phone lines, no internet, no supply lines like supply trucks. And winter is looming around the corner, and as it gets colder and colder and supplies start to dwindle, especially the food supplies, panic starts to increase among the community. And then you also have some like outsider drama going on. It was pretty good. You don't see a lot of like the actual apocalypse, like the thing that happens. It's mostly a story about the people trying to move on and create this new life from, you know, a second version of their world that they grew up in. Okay, so this category of books I would call more gory, more like body horror focused. You get a lot more like graphic details. Not that you didn't get any in like the spooky vibes one, but this category definitely focuses on that aspect more. And I'm gonna start with my favorite in this category. It's definitely not the goriest of the bunch, but it is the one that resonated with me the most and the longest, and that is The Long Walk by Richard Bachman, aka Stephen King. In this one, on the first day of May, 100 teenage boys meet for a race called The Long Walk. And basically, it is a walk that doesn't stop until there is a single boy remaining. And there are some rules. You have to walk a certain speed, you can't ever stop, and you only get like 3 chances. And after you've reached your limit, what happens is pretty violent. Yeah, this one was pretty bleak. It's a good one. Whew, this one was a rough one. I listened to it on audiobook, which might have been a mistake. And that is The Troop by Nick Cutter. Holy crap, the body horror in this one is intense. Like, absolutely gets under your skin. So a troop of boys and their troop leader venture into the Canadian wilderness for a 3-day camping trip where, you know, they're expected to do normal, like, Boy Scout troop sort of deals. And unfortunately, very soon into their trip, they discover an unexpected intruder. He is this super pale, insanely thin, voraciously hungry dude. And yeah, it just gets worse from there. And it ends up having like some weird Lord of the Flies energy. Yeah, I am never gonna read this one again, but I am glad I did it once. I'm mostly glad. It was a lot. Next we have my favorite short story collection by Junji Ito, and it is Shiver. So most of his work does have some elements of body horror, and like combining that with the insanely creepy illustration style Ito has, like, whew, it can definitely make some people sick to their stomachs. Like me. It's just so, ugh. It can be a little hard to read, but if that sounds up your alley, definitely check this one out. And like, I would say a lot of other Junji Ito work stuff is also really good. I still need to read Uzumaki, the spiral horror one, but I don't know if I'm ready. Next is probably my favorite book that I've ever given 2 stars to. That is Into the Drowning Deep by Mara Grant. This is basically a campy, gore-filled tale that answers the question, what if mermaids were real? And they also feasted on human flesh. This one, it's, oh gosh, it's so silly, but also very terrifying and like visceral and gooey. Like you really get to experience watching someone get torn limb from limb, disemboweled by a mermaid. It's not going to be for everyone, but if you are into like absurd horror stuff, I think you would be down with this one. This next one is also a very gory one, but it definitely tries to stay more in the realistic world. This is Pretty Girls by KARIN Slaughter, and yeah, it is a shockingly gory novel that follows 2 sisters as they discover what probably happened to their older sister who went missing years ago, along with several other girls from their community. And just look up the trigger warnings, because there's a lot of them. It was at many times tough to read because of the subject matter, but like, I mean, it did a good job in shocking me and making me sick to my stomach, so if that sounds good, try this one. Next I have Carry and Comfort by Dan Simmons. So this story is kind of split into 2 timelines. So the older one takes place in this Nazi-run concentration camp during World War II, where you're following a Jewish prisoner who kind of escapes one hell by entering an entirely different and maybe worse hell. And then the second timeline is kind of partially continuing that one, because you still see him as like an older man, and then you follow some newer characters, younger characters, entering into that hellish world that he first discovered at that concentration camp. And the hell is basically run by these people who have psychic abilities to be able to manipulate others. So they can like read their minds, make them do things against their will, protect them, fight for them. And in doing that, they can make people just do unspeakable acts of violence. And I read this one a while ago and I don't remember the details, but I do remember it being pretty intense. So that's why I put this one in this one, because it does have a lot of like spooky, creepy vibes, because these are like creepy people, but I think it's more intense than the other category. This one. I read this one quite a few years ago. I think it came out like 2015, 2016. This is The Ruins by Scott Smith. And I watched the movie last Halloween. I think I still like the book better, but the movie is still decent. You know, it's you'll see. In this one, a group of party-loving tourists take a day trip into the Mexican jungle. So they're originally staying at this like resort in Cancun that's very touristy, you know? And they meet up with some Greek tourists and they decide, hey, you should come along with us. We're gonna go take a trip into the jungle and see some ruins. And they decide to go with them, and they do find the ruins. And then shit hits the fan. It is bonkers what happens. Like, I wasn't expecting it. It gets some gross body stuff going on here, and yeah, it was gross to read, also gross to watch in the movie. Both were fun. Yeah, this one was a fun, kind of dumb one. I said I wasn't going to talk about this book again, but But apparently I lied to myself, because here it is, and it is Haunted by Chuck Palahniuk. Okay. It's just so gross, guys. But anyway, the main idea, it's like a collection of short stories, but each of them are connected by this overarching narrative of this artist retreat. So a bunch of people show up at this old theater to do this like 3-month long retreat where they can focus on whatever artistry that they want. So they are desperate to finally get rid of the distractions of the normal day world to try to produce this masterpiece that they've known they've had inside them forever. So you get some really weird people, and each of them have their own story about their past and how they got here and what's, you know, what nonsense they've gotten into. And some of the stories are kind of funny, but a lot of them are straight up horrific and terrifying and disgusting, and some of them are straight up horrible people. It's so gross and scary. Like, I really don't ever want to think about this book again. Like, good job, Chuck, you did it. Okay, that's it. This is the last time. I swear, I'm not talking about it again. I can't. Okay, as a bit of a palate cleanse after that one, I recommend, honestly, I almost put this as my favorite in this category because it is a lot of fun, and it is The Last Final Girl by Stephen Graham Jones. I love slasher horrors, like, especially as movies. They're probably like my favorite genre of horror, and getting to read this one was basically like watching a slasher movie. It is such a fun read, and it plays with the classic like teen slasher horror tropes like, oh no, sex is bad. If you sex, then you die. Or, haha, to be the final girl, you must be a virgin because, like I said, sex is bad. You know, that kind of stuff. And it's so entertaining, and like the deaths, some of them were like, they caught me off guard. Like, you thought it was gonna be okay, and then it definitely was not okay. And it was a lot of fun. And it's also written as if you were watching the scenes play out on a movie screen, which may not resonate with others, but definitely resonated with me as a slasher movie fan. And oh man, yeah, I probably should have put this one as my favorite, but it's gonna be here as a palate cleanser. Those are all the books I have for you this year. Yeah, hopefully I'll see you again in October before the wrap up. But yeah, until then, I hope you all have a wonderful week, or 2 weeks, or however many weeks till I see you again. Do something nice for yourself. Do something nice for others. And have fun out there. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!